Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Pop Culture SquadCast. Hi, Mike.
Hey Bob, how you doing? It's Thursday. What's
It
what's
is Thursday.
what's the
It's
deal?
well, we've moved this show to Thursdays for this month of March because we have mostly Tuesday shows for Women in History Month. We have a bunch of Women in History SquadCasts that we have. We had the first one a couple of days ago where we had Janice, and June, and it was a great show. We
That
talked
must have
about
been fun.
Kim. We talked about Kim Yale, and that was fun too.
Mm.
And since you brought it up, and that kind of came up, I feel that Kim is really, really special in the history of comics. She's somebody that is super important. One of the people you can't tell the story without, as you are as well. And I know you were very close with her, and it was the 26th anniversary of her passing on Tuesday.
I know. I can't believe that.
I know. Why don't can you share with the viewers a little bit about what Kim Yale meant to the industry and you?
Well, okay, let's go dark.
Well, it
I
could be
hired.
positive. Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
no, you'll see.
You do it as you want to do it.
I will anyway.
I know.
I'm the one who hired Kim at DC, brought her out to DC, and here's the dark part. A whole lot of people, including some people who really should have known better, said a lot that the only reason why I had hired her was because John Ostrander, her husband, and I have been friends since they invented oxygen.
Right.
And oh, I got a cat here. Sorry, folks,
That's
that's not
okay.
my tail. It's the kittens. Um, and some of those folks never changed their opinion till the day she left the company. Um, so when you hear women say that they have to work, twice as hard to get past those barriers, those horrific barriers that are narrowing, but not fast enough. And hopefully, I mean, what, 300 years? I don't have 300 years to wait. Um, it's even harder when they can point to you and say, "You're no good. You're just sleeping with a guy who is."
Yeah, well,
And I
that's not
know a
true.
lot of women in a lot of fields, including comics, where that's true. So I think the first thing I have to say about Kim is her courage.
Hmm.
She did not take shit from anybody, but was usually pretty graceful about it. None of us are all the time, but she was usually very graceful about it. Mr. Sorley, she was not
And
from this planet. She
yeah,
was from a better planet.
I regret missing the opportunity to meet her.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and I don't want to turn from that too much because it is Women's History Month, and maybe we'll get to this in our later episode as well. But I want to talk about, and I want to highlight somebody who I know is important to you, and I'm going to bring in a slide here, not a slide, blah blah blah. Bring in the screen.
still see me.
Yeah, hang on a second here. I'm gonna trying to get this silly thing. A window. Here we go.
Ah.
All right.
Oh, beautiful.
So I know that. So it is Women's History Month and Women in Comics, and so Miss Fury was created by June Tarpe Mills, who is known for being the first woman to create a female character, and she was heavily involved in the early days of comics. Miss Fury appeared in or debuted in 1941 and ran to 1952. Do you remember ever seeing Miss Fury in the comic sections?
I do have memories of when I was 2 years old, but I think that my local paper had dropped it by then.
I'm sure.
And even if it didn't, I was two.
I know. I understand that, but I know you're a huge fan, and
I am a huge fan. I'll tell you where it started. It started off with Wally Wood, as many things do. Now that I think about it,
that's a good place to start.
Yeah. There was this piece in Mad, 2-page spread in Mad. It was a retirement home for comic strip characters, newspaper comic strip characters, which means it's pretty damn crowded right now. And it was very, very, very funny. And I'd recognized that it was enough of a comics fan, even by then. It was very early Mad magazine, to be able to recognize many of the characters in that spread. Except for this one called Miss Fury. And I'm looking at her, and Wally Wood did have a tendency to draw women in a very dynamic form.
Sure.
Euphemism of the week, folks. And
well, he did invent the boob window, okay? So
yeah. And I'm looking at her and I'm going like, wow, who the hell is that? Miss Fury. I mean, I'm into superheroes. I'm into comics. I may or may not have been into women per se at that young age. So I kept that in the back of my mind. And maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years later, I'm reading something in a fanzine or something. And it was all about Tarpe Mills. And about how Miss Fury happened, how she started out as Black Fury, and
sure,
it was in a modest number of papers, usually papers in a 2 or 3 or 4 newspaper town. They used to exist back then, and I was able through guys like George Hagenauer and other true masters of comics history. I was able to get a couple of copies of a couple of the Sunday pages. They were only Sundays, and I was going like, wow, this is like for the early 1940s, mid 1940s. This is a real superhero. This is great. It didn't. I wasn't that impressed one way or the other by the fact that she was a woman. I was impressed by the character. As I got older, and I met thousands of cartoonists, and they all had that Y chromosome. I'm thinking, wait a moment, she did something pretty serious here. Right. But before that, in the late 1930s, she started out writing and drawing for comics, for comic books.
Right.
Not any of the major publishers, as I recall. It was something,
Funny Page, Star Comics, Amazing Mystery Funnies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
she did Regular Fellers.
Yeah, well,
she worked for Regular Fellers. That's one of the weird ones to find.
Yeah, well, the book is very deceptive.
Sure.
So when you get a chance, check out a few copies.
I've
seen somewhere.
I've seen 1 or 2.
But so now I'm fitting her comic book career from the late 30s into the rest of her career, and I realized that this is a woman who moved mountains.
Sure.
I never met her. I mean, Trina has, but I can obviously, but I can only surmise how difficult it was for her to create and maintain a living. I don't know if it was a great living or what. I believe she lives in New York, so it's not a cheap town.
No.
So it's mostly Trina who got me the information and got me the leads, and other folks, because I hung out with comics fans who were older than me, except for George, who's only a couple of months older than me, and they had access to it. Joe Sarno, who opened one of the very first comic book stores in America. There's a lot of people with legitimate claims to that title. Joe is a sweetheart. Also co-founded the Chicago Comic Con. He had copies, so I was lucky. I was in the right place to do the homework.
That's awesome. She's
Hi, Sherry.
Sherry says hi, and Mark says surprised that there's a lot of people who have comic books in New York. I don't know, like we got our guest is in New York, native New Yorker. We'll get to him.
Yeah,
soon
and you got to pay us, but otherwise, yeah, we're there are all kinds of us out here.
It's important to remember people like Tarpon Mills and Tony Bloom, and women who worked in the 40s. There were women working, drawing, writing, creating comics in the 40s when comics was mostly superheroes that became other things, and they're often not remembered. They're often, they're not which is disappointing but not terribly surprising.
No, that's how the popular culture of every time works. The new stuff comes in so fast, and you don't know who's doing all of it and stuff. Sometimes it catches up. These days, it tends to because of the internet. But that's cool.
So we are going to be celebrating that this month at Pop Culture Squad. We have already done our first. We have another SquadCast scheduled for this Monday. It's not Tuesday because I'm traveling, but we're going to have Heather Antos and Shelley Bond and Diana Schutz on Monday. So everyone tune in for that. I want to talk about, and so now this is Bob and Mike time. So I want to kind of throw one thing else at you. And I didn't tell you about this one. So you and I have been talking about something that's coming up, and it may have to do with someone who wrote a letter to the editor, and we'll get to that later on. But because of that, it made me think about letter hacks, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I remember it was a few years ago, or a couple of years ago. I remember talking about I'm fairly certain it was John Sable, number 23, and there's a letter in there. I'm fairly certain it was that, and I went looking for it earlier, and I couldn't find it where it was supposed to be, and I'm really upset about that. I want everybody to know that I'm very upset that the book that I thought was where it's supposed to be is not where it's supposed to be. But
they never are.
I'm pretty sure it was John Sable 23, and there was a letter from Bo Smith in it.
Oh yeah,
and Bo Smith basically was complaining about Grell's faces. And you published it. He was complaining that he drew the same face, all the time. That old story. But the interesting thing about it is, I didn't know that Bo Smith was a letter hack and had written letters to the editor. And you told me that you guys later used him as a character, or you adapted him as a character in a book.
We turned him into a villain in Hawkworld, and that's because the story that we had planned to do and got shit canned at the last moment. It was a crossover, and for whatever reason that we did have permission, then we didn't have permission to do the crossover. I forget the details. So we needed to replow this story. John Ostrander is the writer here, and I don't know if we had just done a convention with Bo, or Bo and Timothy Truman are good friends and old friends, and
that's unsurprising to me.
Live in the area. Well, they don't talk politics, but so we were tight, and I said, well, let's call him Smith Bo. And we worked with that a little bit, and and then he got a job, I guess, was it Eclipse maybe, and moved on from there. We even worked together briefly we were packaging for IDW, and he was at
Mhm.
IDW at that time.
I think Winona Earp was an IDW product, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But this was before. I think this was even before that. Maybe not. Hard to say because they brought it back and they had the TV stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So, but they're interesting if people don't know. I mean, I'm assuming most of our audience does, but there were a bunch of writers who got work as comic book writers because they were well-known letter writers. People like Marty Pasco, I know he was one of them. Tom
Yep.
Peyer, I found some old Tom Peyer letters.
Yep.
I think Kurt Busiek was a letter hack as well. Did
Absolutely.
you ever write a letter to the editor?
Yes, I'd written several, 2 or 3.
Did you ever get published?
Yep, I sure did.
I
just
fantastic.
wasn't a regular.
No, I understand that, but you did.
But the guys like Len Wein and Marv Wolfman, I mean, they were actually writing letters before they were doing the fanzine stuff, and then the fanzine stuff gave them the opportunity to work on their craft and wind up selling scripts to Julie Schwartz and stuff over at DC and other places. So it was a good conduit. We're going to miss bringing new talent in that way, unless you're reading Savage Dragon, because they have a 4-page letter column. But
I'm not sure Eric's bringing people in to write Savage Dragon either.
I don't know. Eric is very good about letting.
I'm not. I didn't mean that. I'm just saying. Yeah. It's such an interesting concept that it doesn't exist anymore. I think it's evolved in different ways. The ability, like one of the things was like the concept of fanzines has morphed into fan fiction and so many different ways. Like it's still there. People are doing the same type of stuff. It was such an interesting conduit. Like people, and I know George Gastenis, who writes for the New York Times and works for the New York Times. Huge comic fan, big part of the community, but he has, I don't know, like 7 or 8 letters that got published. I think I have 1 or 2.
If you go back and look at the early 1900s issues of Adventure, which was a pulp, not Adventure Comics. This is way before then.
Okay.
Like the Shadow, the pulp magazines.
But
this was, and Adventure was one of the biggest at the time. You'll see fan letters from Teddy Roosevelt.
That's crazy.
Not a lot, but I got news for you. Our current Attorney General grew up a couple of blocks from where I grew up. We bought our comic books at the same drugstore, which was halfway between his place and mine. We went to the same grammar school, the same high school. He's 2 years younger than me.
Did you know him?
Although he only as a comics fan, and
you knew him as a comics fan.
Yeah, and Garland has got a slightly untraditional name, so that kind of stuck a little bit. But that's it. Well, he was the other guy who was there when they would open up the bundle of new comics on Thursdays at the Lincoln and Crawford Pharmacy in Lincolnwood, Illinois.
Is there anybody you don't know?
Yes. Well, wait, you mean living?
Alive. Well, there's a lot of people that are not around that you still know too. So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of dead people I never got a chance to meet. Teddy Roosevelt.
Sure, exactly. Well, I wouldn't put it past you. So
sadly, you're not the first person to ask me that question today.
I understand. There you go. Marcus put it exactly correct. The Kevin Bacon of comics. There we go. The 6 degrees of Michael.
Can I tell you the story about how I met Kevin Bacon?
No, why don't we tell that? And then we'll get to our guest. Let's hear about how did you meet Kevin Bacon?
Now the whole thing turns in on itself. We're eating our tail here. San Diego Comic-Con, maybe 13 years ago. That sounds about right. I'm rushing through the floor, which is something impossible to do, particularly on a Saturday. But I have to get to my panel. And of course, in San Diego, your panel is in like Mexico or something. I mean, it's really far. So, I'm trying to push through the crowd. I didn't have my cane back in those days, so I couldn't make a path. And just as I get past the Marvel tables, the Marvel booth, they were starting one of their like hourly giveaways, and they were throwing t-shirts out at the audience. And I can't get through. And this guy standing next to me can't get through, and he's got a panel. So he pokes me and he says, "Hey, let's do a flying wedge thing." And I go, "Sure." And I turn and I look, and he says, and I recognize him. He sees that I recognize him. It's Kevin Bacon. But the only words he says to me at that moment in time, "Don't say it." And I laughed my ass off. Right. I laughed my ass off, and we did the flying wedge thing, probably with a lot more power than we should have, but I was energized from the joke and his wonderful sense of timing. And we made it. We made it to our panels. The rooms were like next to or very close to one another, so that was cool.
That is awesome. So, Mark, just so you can jot this down, Mike Gold at San Diego Comic-Con counts as a link with Kevin Bacon. So therefore, there we go.
That's right.
All right. Let us get moving. And tonight we're gonna have a special guest, and we're gonna bring him in right about now. So hang on a second. I think he's ready. Welcome, everybody, for Dean Haspiel. How are you, Dean? You are appropriately dressed as expected. Thank you. Thank you for being shirtless.
We're in my studio.
I didn't know that was the deal tonight.
Well, if Dean's around,
gross everybody out.
That's how it goes.
Hey, this is what I'm going to be known most for. Not any comic I ever did. Right?
That is not acceptable.
But in the spirit,
although it is the first thing I found out about you.
Oh, really? Oh, yes. Wow. Okay. From who?
Adrian.
So, in the spirit of this, I never knew that Wallywood invented the boob window. What do you mean?
All right. So here's the story. We're talking about Power Girl's boob window.
Yeah.
Okay. So he designed her costume, which she first appeared in All-Star Comics in '76. Is that right, Mike? Somewhere around there.
Maybe.
So All-Star Comics, that when they brought back the Justice Society in that All-Star Comics, they created Huntress in there as well, and Power Girl. So he designed the costume, and the concept, he had the hole, and like there's talk about that it wasn't supposed to be they didn't know what symbol to put in there, but essentially the hole was there. So he drew it empty, and that's how they did it. But by about the third issue, they're like, okay, we can't have this anymore, and they closed it up. But there's I think it's the third issue of All-Star Comics. It's not the actual, like, you have to go back to the 40s for the actual numbering, but like it's the third issue in the 70s, and the cover inside, because he just drew the covers, he didn't do the interiors. So the cover that he drew has the window, but it's completely colored white. And then they went back and put it back. But it was his original design that had the open chest for Power Girl.
But it's still the boob window had a cleavage line or not?
Yep.
Do you know?
It
did.
Oh, God, yes.
Huh.
It had a lunar landing mission on it. That's how big that was.
It's Women's History Month, Michael.
Wow.
That should be part of it, then.
It is Wallywood.
This design has come into enormous criticism over the years, as the largely male-dominated industry became a little bit more aware of, humanity. And yet Woody helped me with my adolescence. So Brad
So
Treese
Brad's
says
giving
this
us numbers. Thank you,
Hey,
Brad.
hey, Brad. Oh,
Oh,
See,
my-
Brad knows.
No.
But
yes,
it never went
yes, he
away.
did.
In other words, she's always had the boob window, whereas Iron Man only had a nose for like 11 issues or something, right?
Well, no, the boob window went away because
It did.
immediately, but when they switched
it comes and goes. It depends on which
it came
incarnate,
back.
which dimension, which Earth.
Right.
Now they have a new one, and I don't know what she's wearing. I don't think she does either. Oh, Dean got cold.
No, I didn't get cold. I remember I pitched an idea to an editor a few years ago featuring a character named Dick Window.
Yeah, and that didn't work.
I never figured out the design though.
Interesting. Wally could have helped you.
Well, I'm glad.
Sherry's disappointed.
Sure. Sorry, Sherry.
No, so in like issue where when they stopped they made him change it. They in that still All-Star Comics run, they switched it to like a regular like V-neck type of situation. And or where it was come across like, but when that issue, and I think that the window was back when they started drawing her again in Infinity Inc., because that's probably where she would have come back regularly.
I thought she had it for those showcase issues.
She may have.
I remember the first cover. You have to remember that the editorial director for DC Comics at that time, and I think even the editor of All-Star, was Joe Orlando.
Okay.
And Joe had probably the greatest sense of humor of any cartoonist I know of his generation. Okay, Dean? And, he danced in the halls when DC, as it turns out temporarily, had the Garbage Pail Kids license. Because now he can finally show Bill Gaines up. And I thought, that's
well,
so
to give context,
humor.
Joe Orlando was an EC Comics artist, right? Originally.
Oh,
and then didn't he also draw the pirate story in the back of Watchmen? And
yes, he did.
And then he was
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yeah, he did the artwork for the pirate story.
It is beautiful.
In Watchmen. And he was my first editor at DC when DC Comics had the bonus book initiative, if you remember, Mike.
Oh,
and I did 2 stories. I did one for Detective Batman, and then I did one where a Booster Gold and Blue Beetle story for
Justice
League International.
I have that book.
It's awful. My art is awful, but he was a great editor.
Awful. It is not awful, but you also
I learned more from watching him work from a 20-minute conversation while he was working. I learned more about comic storytelling in those 20 minutes than I have before or since combined. And I've been in this business for something like over a half century now. So, that's how good Joe was. Joe was brilliant.
Yeah.
So there. I'm angry about it. He was so brilliant. I'm angry about it.
I think we need to start talking to our guest about his latest. Well, he's done a lot of stuff. We can talk about a lot of stuff, but let's get heavy into the thing he's doing right now. Hang on a second. Let me stop this and let me bring it up.
You're just going to show the cover, right? Not.
I'm only showing the cover.
Okay.
Mike and I have been privy to the secret stuff, which is really good, and we're going to talk about it. But anyway, we will not show it. So COVID cop
pages on my iPad right here. Actually,
excellent.
I can just whip it out anytime.
Well, and normally I wouldn't mind showing a lot of it because that just helps promote, I think, and would help sell it. But I am so worried right now about, and I don't know how I feel about, and how you guys feel about AI art pirates
Oh,
and
sure.
the idea of training. The word training, by the way, is also like, what the hell? Where'd that come from? These AI, artificial intelligence to, do mashups and create, basically original work out of everything we put online, right?
Sure.
Right.
And I've been web comics in 2006, and
Right.
I have
I mean,
a ton of stuff up there,
sure. Like that's
I'll
something we're
tell
going to
you,
talk
I
about.
did a column about it for Pop Culture Squad a couple of weeks ago, something like that, and it's evolved so much even in the last couple of weeks. There's actually good news here. The good news is that the Copyright Office has decided to be good guys,
Mm,
For
and they're
now.
not going to issue copyrights to AI work.
For now.
And that's a big deal, at least right now, if they can
right.
change it or mitigate it somehow. So that's good news. And I understand your concern. Note, I did not say paranoia. It's concern. And everybody else's. Absolutely. Um, it's Roy Lichtenstein pills. Just add water. Boom. Except that you don't make the money off of your work. Roy Lichtenstein did.
Right. Well, you know what though? I mean, again, I don't know exactly how I feel ultimately about the idea of it, because I think there's a lot of cool things. Just like when when hip hop samples music, or anybody samples music, except in legally you're supposed to get permission or pay for it or whatever.
Right.
But then you still can recognize usually the music, where in AI art it's almost impossible to figure out what element was taken from here and there. And sometimes maybe at first it's a little obvious, but what ultimately it bothers me is it's taking away paid work for certain kinds of jobs, right? Like concept
Absolutely.
art,
Yeah.
that kind of a
There
thing.
is some precedent, legal precedent, from the parody business. That brings us back to Bill Gaines, because he's the guy who set one of these precedents. It's okay to parody. That's part of freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to satire if you know what satire is. It's something that I've been known to commit once in a while in the dark of night. But if you do it regularly, then it's considered earning a living, and that would be wrong. Al Cap took Chester Gould's Dick Tracy, parodied him as Fearless Fosdick, as he did many other newspaper strip characters. And at first, Cap was a creep, but to say the least. But Gould thought, that's nice, And then they brought him back, and Gould says, "Wait a moment." And then they brought him back, and they brought him back, and they brought him back. Every couple of months, there'd be a story, either in the dailies or the Sundays. And they licensed Fearless Fosdick out to Wildroot Cream Oil. So there is this little Fearless Fosdick strip, paid advertising strip, in the newspapers, in comic books. But Gould never took it all the way. And given the various precedents that have been set, if you're doing parody of the same thing over and over and over, regular, then you're ripping the guy off. And I think those are precedents that apply to AI art as well. I am equally concerned, and I'm not taking anything away from the AI art argument. I am equally concerned about the AI writing programs.
Oh yeah,
because that's even more invisible. It's invisibler. It's just what you see from an AI piece is some guy or woman who's not getting a check at all. It's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the guy who actually delivered the script gets a check, but only for a while until they figure out it's AI, and then they won't need him, for crying out loud. If they saw South Park last night, they don't need artists and writers to use AI. You don't need to tell them. They saw South Park, and that's what the whole story was all about last night, and it was brilliant.
There was a story I saw 2 days ago where they wrote the AI wrote a MASH scene that Alan Alda and Mike Farrell read.
Yeah. Creepy, isn't it?
It's very creepy.
It is, and like again, you can't stop it. It's going to continue, and people are going to be subversive about it, and they're going to. So, how do you parse it? I don't know. How do you police it? I don't think you can. I think that even when you place laws into this, people can still work their way around it. And I don't know. I ultimately just call them out.
I'm sorry.
You said it again.
I say you can do what Donald Trump does, which is not something I normally advocate, but you can sue them. And if you have enough money to sue them, they're going to fold because they don't have enough money, or it's just not worth it. And if that happens enough over and over and over again, maybe people will be circumspect. Notice I said maybe.
Sure.
However, Mr. Fishman, who was up here talking about how AI is a tool, is right. When we did Shatter over at First Comics, it was the first comic book story told using a computer as the brush, as the pen, as the pencil.
Michael Science, right?
Yeah, and it was fine for what it was. It got better, but it became invisible, and now I shouldn't say most, but many cartoonists are using computers as a day-to-day part of their job. Virtually all colorists do, letterers. They're tools, unless you decide to rip somebody off, and then you're a goddamn thief. That's what it boils down to. And we treat you like a thief.
Yep.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair. I want to. I know we've been talking about this, and Dean keeps bringing up things, but let's talk about COVID Cop.
Okay.
Right? Tell me what it is. Tell the people why they should back.
Well, COVID Cop.
Well, before you get COVID Cop is currently a Kickstarter. Is currently available till the end of March, I believe.
Yep.
That people can go to Kickstarter and back. It is. You can get links on popculturesquad.com. You can get links on Following Dean, and you should absolutely go check it out. But tell us why we should do that.
Well, thank you, and thanks for letting me talk about it on Pop Culture Squad. I in the eyes of the pandemic, we're talking like 2020. I became voracious. I was much more creative than I've ever been, and I'm creative every day, right? And where understandably a lot of people were blocked by what was happening in the real world, I use that as like a fuel and an energy to kind of respond to it. And so I wrote a couple of pandemic stories. I wrote an essay about my friend wanting to crash my couch. I did a story about the Red Hook dealing with the 7 o'clock clap. That everyone in the city or the cities or around. I don't know how far it went beyond New York City, but I imagine a lot of places appreciated the first responders. I did a comic about that. I co-edited and co-curated a anthology called Pandemics with my studio mate Whitney Matheson. That was the first anthology to respond to the pandemic, with a bunch of stories from studio mates and other artists. That is over at the Hero Initiative. You can buy it for $5, and it helps artists in need. And I also wrote this thing called COVID Cop, and it was kind of semi-inspired by, there's parody and satire and ripping off, and then there's inspiration, right? So COVID Cop is inspired by the likes of Toxic Avenger, Mad Max, Sin City, Charles Burns' Black Hole, Judge Dredd. And then recently someone pointed out Gil Roth, the Virtual Memories podcast, spotted martial law in this a little bit as well, so.
Oh yeah, sure.
And, I wanted I wanted to create an anti-hero to deal with this pandemic. And to be honest, this was written before there was a cure, let's call it, or something that made us feel a little bit better about how to deal with what was going on, because so many people were dying. And if you got it, you felt like, am I going to die? You didn't know what was going to happen. And you still don't know. You still can get it, and it can,
Sure, but there was that time when before medications were available, before vaccines were available, when the numbers just kept going up, and we would hit wave after wave after wave, and we didn't, there's a very real feeling that we're all going to have to deal with that.
Yep.
We were scared.
And then there was a summer, like I think that first summer, or maybe it was the second one, I can't remember, time got fuzzy, where you felt like, oh, I could take my mask off and walk around the streets and go to the beach or be in open areas, as long as there was a certain distance. But then we got hit hard again in the winter, right? And then in the big cities, it's hard because we all live so close to each other versus a farm or a country house or whatever. So I created this
in Manhattan, in New York City, they legalized weed during that time. And,
That's right.
The mask.
It's in the way.
It's in the way. Although I did shoot a video of a guy walking in Prospect Park near Park Slope, who had the mask and the goggles, and it was almost like a hazmat suit, but he had a hole right here and a huge cigarette that was just burning in his face. It was just like it was like a joke.
Oh, cool.
Bizarre, Anyway, so I created this character.
It couldn't be a joke, but if you had drawn that, it would be inspirational.
Yeah, but it was almost too on the nose, but so I created this character, and I staged it like 10 years from now, where we didn't find a cure, and 98% of humanity did die off, and there's these cops that have been charged with this mandate to basically continue to diminish mankind, because the government has decided the worst thing that ever happened to planet Earth is humanity, right? So these cops are kind of on these patrols to make sure as they mutate and get grosser and are near death, are just wiping out the rest of mankind. And then our guy Lincoln Bio, who's an officer, and he was like kind of the leader of the CVC, which is the Corporeal Virus Corps, has decided, you know what? No, there is another way. And that's what part of this story, this that happens in this one shot, is about. There is another way, and it is hope. And he figures, and this is something I've done. This is where it becomes autobiographical. I drink Gowanus Canal water straight from the tap here in Red Hook, and we had a studio in Gowanus as well. And it's famous for syphilis and toxins, and that's where they bury the bodies. And I feel like when I drink it, it just makes me stronger, and it gives me an immunity that no one else has. So Lincoln Bio, aka COVID Cop, has been steeping in the waters of the canal and feels like he has become the antidote, so he can perpetrate hope. And he comes upon, at the very first couple of pages, he comes upon his old team and his ex-wife, Fate Majeure. Yeah. And and they kind of fight it out a little bit, right? But meanwhile, the government's also done something awful. They've weaponized the holidays. So you have like a bad Santa or an Easter bunny with a chainsaw, and they like are there to basically do the last thing anyone's supposed to do, is that's to destroy our traditions, right? Because when you destroy our traditions, it just makes you more angry and opens your pores up to be even more susceptible to the disease, the virus. So anyway, this is part of what I was thinking at the time. And I showed it to a couple of publishers. They loved it, and they said, we could never publish this. And I was like, why? This is exactly the kind of thing you can respond to. This is what comics do best. They're like, because it's called COVID. We can't publish something with this word on it right now. Everyone hates this word. They're frightened by and I totally got it, And so I started thinking, what else do I call it? And I was thinking Chronic Cop, Vice Cop, like all these, and it wasn't working at all, And so I put it away. I worked on some other projects. And then recently, when I didn't have any work, I was like, you know what? I'm going to double down on this idea. And I'm going to spark my first Kickstarter. And I drew the 24 pages, and I'm almost done coloring and lettering it. And I've got this campaign going, and I'm doing my best to try to become, or test the waters of being a self-publisher.
Well, congratulations, and we best you,
yeah,
of
really,
course, for that.
And get some sleep. But having read the first 16 pages of the first issue, and being one of the few, the honored, I was taken aback a bit in a very positive sense. I'm about to bestow high praise upon you, so you may want to jot down the time. Of the early first year, 2 years of Judge Dredd, when Mick McMahon and Brian Bolland, and Ian Gibson were involved, and your style is sort of right in the middle of all three. There are Kevin O'Neill overtones to it, absolutely, very strong, as far as I can see. And to be held up against that, which I think are some of the best comics done in the 1970s, and it totally changed the medium, 2000 AD, in its original years. I think that's high praise. I mean it as high praise. It's very good.
I'll take it, and I really appreciate that, because one of the things I was trying to go for when I was thinking, well, what is this going to look like in terms of color? And I'm not really a colorist, and I like to use a limited palette in a lot of my work, And I was like, you know what? To me, the future looks like heavy metal from the 1980s and 2000 AD, from the era you're talking about. Also add the light poster art of the 70s, right? A little bit of that. That's what the future looks like to me, And I'm using the past to access that in some way, stylistically. So I really appreciate what you say, because that's exactly what I'm going for. And I hope when people read this, they'll laugh. Maybe you'll feel a little bombastic, but that's the point, and yet at the end of the day, and you haven't seen the entire story, it's a love story. It has heart. And ultimately that's where hope comes from.
So I have two things to say. One is, that's what I expect when I read a Dean Haspiel story. I expect the heart to come at me from here where I'm expecting it to here. It's like it's going to come at me, and I'm not going to know. But everything that you write is hopeful, even though it doesn't appear to be. And I appreciate that. And the other part I was going to say is, I was talking to Mike. Mike and I, kind of chatted before you got on and before we got on, and I think you're getting better and better as an artist. And I don't mean that in any negative way. Like, this is gorgeous stuff. It is tight. It is the imagery is perfect. The way that you do, I really am a huge fan of yours, and I'm a huge fan of what you've done, like particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, and in terms of Red Hook and what you did with that saga. And this is just constantly moving forward. The way that I know you did some more Technicolor palettes with some of the later Red Hook stuff, and going back to more of a limited palette here works so well in terms of the imagery. Just, it's good stuff. It is good stuff. People will not be disappointed.
Actually, your work in general. Now, Dean knows this, and I don't want to embarrass him, but I've been a fan of his since he was a small child. And that's true. How old were you back then? A lot younger. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so was I. Yeah. And you're the guy now. The comics that you're producing, because you do a lot of stuff beyond comics, which we should talk about. The comics that you're producing, though, you have put the word school into the phrase "the Alex Toth School."
I love
Simpler.
That.
It's Alex Toth was the Louis Armstrong of comics. Louis Armstrong, if you were going to play on your trumpet like 7 notes Louis could do the same thing in 3.
Mm.
And Alex was the exact same way.
Mm.
Easily the biggest pain in the ass to work with on Earth, in the history of Earth, maybe other planets before that. And I know firsthand, I know so badly that at a convention shortly before his death, Carmine Infantino called me across the floor. Hey, come here. Yeah, yes, Carmine. I mean, you know, I was on my way to the bathroom, but it's Carmine Infantino. And yes, Carmine. I told you not to work with Toth. Yes, you did, Carmine, but he's Alex Toth. And he went, yes, he is.
Yeah.
So welcome to that school, pal. As an artist, that Louis Armstrong thing that he had, you have. I'm not saying you should always use a limited palette, because sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes you want to tell a different type of story. But it works at least in these 16 pages.
Well, thank you. And the last 8 like really tie it up, and I didn't want you to see that yet because I want you to enjoy it as a comic book in your hands. And I really appreciate everything you said. And it's funny because I just came back from mentoring comics for 3 weeks at the Atlantic Center for the Arts.
I want to get into that. Tell us about that.
It's great. It's the second time I've done it. I did it 10 years ago. Other cartoonists have done it. Megan Kelso, Ellen Forney, Josh Neufeld, Paul Pope, a bunch of other artists. Matt Madden, I think Jessica Abel. And, you know, I'm sure everyone does it differently, right? I'm not a teacher, but I feel comfortable saying I can be a mentor. And one of the things that I look for that's important to me is to understand what you're trying to do as an artist and a writer. And then are you able to articulate, you know, these beats and this story? Are you able to show narrative clarity at all? And speaking to what Mike was saying about the Alex Toth School, it's a reduction. It's a shorthand that you're trying to convey big ideas with, you know? And do you need to over render? No, I'm not a big fan of it myself, but you know, your mileage may vary, right? But ultimately what I'm trying to do is help you and help me understand what you're trying to go for. And did you get there? Or do you need to switch a sequence around? Or do you need to take out a panel or add 2 panels? You know, because we're always earning the next panel. That's how I see comics. You need to earn that panel. And why is it an image versus text where image is text in comics, right? So I think about that all the time. And yes, sometimes ultimately when you look at a comic and you go, that looks pretty simple, it may have taken a while to get to simple, you know?
Yep.
And as long as it's doing the job and walking that dog and you're being entertained by it, that's what ultimately matters, you know?
Yeah. Well-trained or lucky writers learn that lesson the hard way, because we'll write something and then if we're doing it properly, we will go over it and start cutting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, making things more succinct. I mean, okay, I was trained in journalism, so that was the life and death of journalism back in the days when people read words. But now, you know, I have this manuscript and I got to cut it, and I got to lose some things that I think are just incredibly witty. Just hilarious stuff that I would want on my tombstone, but didn't work for the story. Got in the way of what I was saying. It made
Ergo, killing your darlings. Yeah, they call that killing your darlings.
That's
and,
right.
and actually, I was saying to someone that like part of growing up and maturing is becoming a better editor of your work.
Yes,
or others,
and that's experience.
Right. And being okay with that, and being okay that you might lose something, but guess what? You might use that for something else, is what the other thing I learned. None of it really disappears. If it disappears, it was meant to go away. It comes back if it's still good, and you can use it for something else. The things
I've had relationships like that, but they didn't work out as well.
I remember I was at New York Comic Con, I don't know, 5 years ago, and I was talking to Chris Claremont, and I asked him, "What is he doing next?" kind of thing. He said, "Oh, he was going to teach comic book writing." I said, "What? You're going to teach him the art of verbosity?" And he told me to fuck off.
Yeah.
As we know, Chris Claremont's famous for writing the X-Men, and he used a lot of words, but I loved all those words. I was just
I loved all those words.
joking.
You know.
Well,
So,
it was old school writing, but that old
Right.
school was just 5 years before. Because if you go back and look at Stan's dialogue, it's
yeah.
just as verbose.
Right.
And then you go back to the guys who, like the EC guys, Kurtzman less, but even still,
Mm-hmm.
and the people from that generation, and you'd want to shake the pages to see if any of the lettering comes loose.
I know, right?
I know. And I still believe that fewer words are better. It's why I like working with writer, artists, and actors
and auteurs
who've gone through blocking. Yeah.
Yep.
So do you think that? All right. So do you think that helps?
Stuff worked. Chris's work obviously works.
Yes, absolutely.
So do you think that John's experience with blocking made him a better writer?
Absolutely.
Who's John?
This is the truth.
Ostrander. We're talking about John Ostrander.
Sorry. Yep.
And this is the absolute truth. This is why I brought him into the business. I knew he was a good storyteller in terms of telling stories, conceiving stories. And that's half the battle. But the other half is how to tell it visually and in an exciting manner. Then there's a third half about deadlines, but we won't go into that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I worked with Del. First Del and John. But I loved working, and I still do, working with actors, particularly those who've had stage experience, although film is fine. It's not prerequisite. It just makes you interesting for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we're going to get meta, and we're going to take that aspect of somebody bringing people into comics who have been in the stage, and then we're going to talk about our guest here, who grew up in comics and has moved to the stage and film. And why don't you talk about that experience? He grew up in a
lot more than just comics.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
true.
I grew up with actors around me, and of course, you're a kid. You don't know who these people are.
Yeah, you don't know that your godmother is,
Shelley Winters in the Poseidon Adventure. I know that, and what is acting, and then she explains to me what that is, and I think I've told that story before. But Robert De Niro, or just Michael J. Pollard, or Steve Railsback, or Susan Terrell. They're in my living room, and I'm a kid, and only in hindsight, I'm like, wait a second, these are really cool, interesting actors, and the storytelling that they were able to do. And I lived in a household of great storytellers, and I don't like to use the term A-type personalities, but very strong personalities, and growing up where my father had a 16 millimeter projector and would show me movies. This is before VHS, showing me movies constantly, me and my brother, and learning to love cinema. And then, the 4:30 movie after school where it'd be Monster Week or whatever, and just steeping in all these, or I didn't know when I was a kid that the Star Trek was a rerun, or Twilight Zone was a rerun, or Honeymooners, or that was just our television at the time, And now there's so much great stuff out there that you will never see most of it.
True.
Right? Because it's all competing for your time,
I don't have time for it.
Who has
I still want to read too, so Right.
I also don't have an attention span that broad. Well,
welcome to 2023. I don't think anybody does.
Well, yeah, absolutely, I agree. There's 300 TV shows or long chopped up movies, really, because they're not really what we think of, or
and then this steals our time constantly.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much good stuff out there. God, Martha Thomas is tight with a charity who works with Bruce Springsteen, and so I've met him a few times. And he did this song about how there's 99 channels and there's nothing on.
Right.
I gotta ask him about that now. I suspect he still hasn't really seen a television set in years, but still.
That reminds me of that Yogi Berra. Like Yogi Berra was famous for his platitudes. Like, what was the one he said about that place is too packed, no one goes there anymore? Something like that, you know?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, those are the things he used to say.
Or if you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah,
I love it. I love that. You know. So I think where Bob was going with this question, or what he was trying to was, you know, I love comics. I'm a diehard comic book fan. I could when I was in Florida, I went to a comic book shop called Cloak and Dagger, and I picked up. I've never even seen this before. Can you see this? Superheroes by Dell.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I've seen that.
What in God's name is that? Then there was like
great, great logo.
The owl is. That's the first issue of a Gold Key comic with Condor Man from the TV show Condor Man. Like, I'm in love with all these old bizarre comics. Like as much as I love Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, and you know, even enjoying Mark Waid and Dan Moore's current World's Finest run, you know, man, I love the outlier stuff, the stuff that's actually not very good, but is even more inspirational in a way. I don't know why.
I had and still have a few good friends, old friends from the Underground Comics days. You know, growing up in Chicago with Skip Williamson there and Jay Lynch and so many others, and Dennis Kitchen just above the border. And all of these people, all of them, were inspired not just from comics in general, that figures, they're doing Underground Comics, but by the EC books. And not just Mad, and those Mad comics, if the house was on fire and I could only save one thing, that would be it.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. But the science fiction, horror a little bit less so. You know, the O. Henry type of storytelling works just as well if you're just talking about boobs and joints. But these were intensely creative guys. At the time, it was kind of hard to see that because we all think of modern comics as Kurt Swan, which is great. I love Kurt, but Kurt Swan and Skip Williamson would never be confused for one another. You know, yet their influences are there, and what they did with them, where they took them, were somewhere else. Like what you're doing with all of the on this new series that for which you're still fundraising, with all the references that you cited. You know, every person you cited, they're all in this work. And that's what an artist is. It doesn't matter what the medium is. You know, you're watching The Consultant, now you're drawing designs like what you see in the workplace there. That's cool. Everybody has to start somewhere. We're the result of all of our influences. I'm babbling mindlessly. I'll shut up now.
No, I know what you mean. We're constantly amalgamating our influences, our mistakes, our passions, and caramelizing. You know, the older you get, and refining and turning that.
Good word.
You know, and yeah, I wanted to write plays. I've been wanting to make movies all my life, as much as I.
And
wanted
you're doing
to make
it.
And I'm doing it little by small. I'm getting there. And
you know, the thing is, it's a 3-hour drive, but if it wasn't that, I'd be at every single one of those. And I apologize for not being there. I'm very excited for you in what you're doing, and please keep sharing that. Please keep doing it, because eventually I'm going to get there.
Oh, absolutely. We ain't quitting.
I'm only an hour and a half drive, but I'm a geek.
You have no excuse.
So, I feel bad. I want to go. I wish I was there. Also, you schedule for when I'm at conventions without you.
Hey,
And
Mike, I had a
how dare
question.
you do conventions without me?
I, I have a question for you, Mike. Like, and maybe you've been asked this before, and I don't mean to put you on the spot because it's like asking you to think hard in a way, but like when you were the editor and on Mark, when you were the editor on American Flag and all those great first comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
In what was it, 80? Well, 85 was when I was an assistant to Chaikin and Sienkiewicz and Simonson. And that must have been the second year, I think, of Flag, maybe something like that.
Yes, I think so.
Something
Maybe
like that.
going into the third, maybe.
Now,
Probably not.
if you had the opportunity today to launch a new line of first comics, and let's just say it was 6 books, this right out the gate, do you have a sense of what kind of comics or who you might want to approach to say let's launch this thing? And it could even be an app on a phone, whatever.
No, well, I mean, that's what paper is today.
Right.
Apps are today's paper. So I'm fine with that.
Right.
I mean, we have to make adjustments, but when we stopped using those 24 or 27 color palettes, we had to make adjustments too. Mm-hmm. So that's fine. That doesn't bother me. Every once in a while, and it's not that infrequent actually, I will read a new comic by some people who are really good. This happened to me earlier today, and wish that I could have been part of that. I could have helped get that into print. I could have, and every once in a while, somebody who's done something absolutely brilliant, but just needs a little bit more of a push. And you try not to do that because you're not getting paid. But,
right.
You can't help yourself. We're terrible people to watch TV shows with, particularly before all the streaming, because we know exactly what's going to happen next.
All
and
the
we're
time.
right about 95% of the time.
Yep.
So even when I grumble, my poor wife would like nudge me.
Yeah. Like, don't say it. Shut up. Don't you spill the beans on this one, even though you figured out in the first 5 minutes.
It's funny. I've in the last, in my, last 6-7 years of me being around writers and creators and artists and stuff, like I've absorbed so much of it that I find myself being that way and a lot more, just because when you start to analyze story and you start to look at things, where it comes from. And there's only 5 stories or something like that in the history of the world that we just keep repeating.
It's how you say it.
I'm sorry?
I was saying it's how you say it. I was just
saying,
I was agreeing.
Right.
Yeah, it's how you say it. Right.
Lester Dent, in a very derogatory speech or article, said there were 7 stories.
Oh, 7.
Now,
that was.
Sorry, he's not the arbiter of how many stories there are, but he's roughly right.
Sure.
There are about 7 stories, but it doesn't mean anything.
No.
I love it when I've started to learn. Sorry to interrupt, but I've started to learn that when you advertise an idea, a story that you've done, you're kind of making a promise to the viewer or the reader that's going to have certain trappings, because based on the genre or the initial pitch or whatever the image is, and that you have to meet that expectation at least. But then the job is to then pervert from that and to go off into a different. I think part of what I love is mashing up genre ideas. And even though it's always going to be a love story and there's always going to be a sense of hope,
right?
It's where do you put it and
sure.
when and why?
That's what I was saying earlier. Exactly. That's what you do.
How does it come out?
How does it come out?
If it comes out of one person, does it come out of the next person in a similar fashion or diametrically opposed?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the ultimate playground. Storytelling, forget about the medium. Storytelling is the ultimate playground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you love storytelling, you can make it in this business if you dedicate yourself to it. It's like
Mhm.
any other form of artistic expression.
Mhm.
If you don't get it, then, what the hell are you watching this podcast for?
And also, I don't think you totally answered my question, Mike, but if there was a
Oh, I'm sorry.
line, I'm wondering what that line would be, because then I'm going to ask that same question to Bob, because Bob hasn't done this, I believe. I don't think you've ever edited a line of comic books, Bob, but I want to know what you
I
have.
have not. I have
Have
not. But I
wanna
have my
know
list.
what your instinct might be after now being in this business for a while, what you would want to see. But I'll ask Mike to kind of maybe.
I do have a line. It's very ethereal. There are concepts, of course, I've passed on, mostly because I just didn't think they were good stories. I don't think that there's a story that anybody could tell that I wouldn't be interested in telling, in helping tell, if it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I would pick up a Mein Kampf miniseries, and I'm serious, if it was well produced. Shit, what's Chaikin's number? Forget it.
Yeah.
But it's a story. It's all about the story.
Well, that wasn't a good story.
I only rejected one item, not story, item, in the 18 issues of Wasteland that we did. Wasteland was probably my furthest out there venture in comic book storytelling by far, in terms of projects I've been involved with and I helped develop. And I'm very proud of it. But there was one cover done by an artist I guess I probably shouldn't name. Well, we'll let you guys decide. The cover was, I rejected this cover. The cover was of a bunch of a hobo fishing off of a bridge, and the bridge was over a stream or a river, and floating down the river were thousands of dead babies. He was fishing for dead babies. Beautifully drawn, wonderfully rendered, just perfect. You got the point immediately, which was probably its biggest problem. So the artist in question was very upset that I rejected it, which surprised me because I thought he did it as a joke. I'm serious. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what. Let me kick it upstairs. I'll take it over to my boss, Dick Giordano, who was hardly a conservative guy. We'll see what he thinks. And he says, okay, that's fair. So I walk down the hall. Knock, knock, knock. Dick, you got a second? He says, yeah. He says, I got this cover and I'm not so sure about it. And I hand it to him and he looks at it and he laughs his head up. He says, fuck you, you already rejected this.
He knew.
Okay, I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know who drew it. Not that
You're reminding me, Mike, of often when I get asked to do a cover, and I'm always honored and appreciative because my art on a cover, okay. Often an editor wants a bunch of ideas, so you have to conceive of a bunch of ideas. And I remember I was doing a cover when we had taken Harvey Picar's American Splendor to DC Vertigo, and they were doing, it was either the first or the second collection, I can't remember. And the editor that had taken over, whose name I won't mention, probably a nice person, I don't think I ever really met them, but they kept asking for more ideas and more ideas of a Harvey Picar cover. Like, you can't go too ballistic on that, you know, like,
right.
It's Harvey Picar, like doing something quotidian and domestic or something, right? But trying to encapsulate like a whole bunch of anthology stories into one simple image, right? And I got so tired of doing all these different like ideas of Harvey at the store or this or whatever. I finally drew a picture of Harvey just putting his hand in, you know, in his pants, right? Like, and I titled it "A Fistful of Harvey," right? And about 10 minutes later, the editor got back to me and said, we're going to use that other one that you decided. You know, like now it wasn't like, let's do any more. we'll choose from the selections you've sent.
Yeah.
So I was able
We've
to
pushed
get
him
that
far
spot.
enough. We've pushed him far. We're getting nothing more back.
That's right.
You should have sent that art to Dave Letterman, because given their relationship on television and the way it ended,
Yeah.
Dave would have thought that was hilarious. Still
And
would
David,
today.
toward the end, at the end of his tenure on the Late Show, or whatever it's called, David Letterman said one of his regrets was how he provoked Harvey so much. He actually kind of apologized, a little
He
bit.
apologized to a couple of people
Yeah.
on separate occasions, I think, and that kind of surprised me. The first one, you feel bad. That's great. There are plenty of things that I've done that I feel bad about. I think I don't remember them, but I mean, it was like that was part of his house cleaning, and I respected that.
Yeah. Bob.
So
what's your comic book line? Your comic book lineup?
I have some ideas that I've that are percolating in the back of my mind. But part of the stuff that we've talked about, one of the things, I like a lot of different types of comics, and anybody who knows my stuff, I would like everything. I like the stuff you do. I like the stuff I like everything from superhero to sci-fi to fantasy to romance to crime and all of those things, and all of those things belong in the medium, and there's a place for every one of them. And it's interesting to see that if I was going to start a comic book company, obviously you wouldn't, nobody's going to start DC or Marvel or anything like that, nor necessarily would they want to, but it should have all of the genres. So whatever line you're doing should have books that belong everywhere. And they don't, and today there's a lot more that's aimed younger, and that style has a particular style, has a particular theme. I mean, to be honest with you, one of the things that DC is doing right is their target demographic and what they're doing with the YA stuff.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Even I picked up this book. Have you seen this one yet?
No, I haven't seen that.
No, I haven't.
Oh,
I haven't
God.
Who wrote that?
It's Sarah Farazan and Nicoletta Baldari, and the artwork is unbelievable in this. And I don't know, the colors, and like I haven't really read it yet, and I'm not the demographic necessarily, but it's like you say, story is a story,
right. There's tons of stuff that I'm not the demographic for, that I read, that I love.
Yeah.
Jim Chadwick, who's an editor of DC, has been since day one. Yeah, great guy, wonderful guy. Just today talked about a YA that he had edited over at DC that about to get scheduled, called Barda, and it's a YA.
Oh, right, I saw that
graphic novel about Big Barda. Only I guess he's not quite so big. And he praises it. Now he's an old time fan. Roughly, he's a little younger than me, but as is everybody else. But as a comics fan, that Kirby stuff at DC, when he first went back to DC, that's holding material for some of us. The New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and Big Barda. If Jim Chadwick is praising the Barda book, that's a book I'm going to check out.
Oh yeah,
sure. There's got to be some truth to the concept there. And really, it's 50 years later. It's okay. Just be true to the concept. It worked for the relaunch of Doctor Who. It worked for the relaunch of James Bond, although other things got in the way later. But still, it worked. Be true to the essential material, the essence of the character, and tell a contemporary story without violating that.
So, two things real quick. One, talk about Barda is the Female Fury story that Cecil Castellucci wrote a few years ago
Mhm.
totally stays true to the character, and
Mm-hmm.
yet is for people, is not necessarily for people who like us grew up, idolizing what Kirby did in the Fourth World. It is accessible to other people. Let's put it that way. People
Right.
who grew up loving Kirby should love it, but it is accessible to other people.
Well, same
and
thing
that's
could
what
be
made
said about Tom King's Mr.
Sure.
Miracle.
True. True. The other thing is, like, for example, I'm talking about the DC stuff, and we're giving them a little praise, but what they're doing, or what Cami Garcia has done with her line of stuff in terms of Breeding the Titans, I've talked to her about it a few times, and she's very particular about the plan that she's had for this, and she's executed it. And the newest one just came out this week or last week. I think Robin in that, and she, if you see her at a show, she's got people lines up. People love it. There are young people who are consuming these characters, who are learning about this stuff, who are enjoying the medium and the storytelling, and it's working. And that's the thing. When I see a line out, big line for Cami Garcia, I know that the industry is gonna be good. It's gonna survive.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about the range of genres that publishers should approach, and of course, Bob, you just said it should be everything, and I can't disagree with that. There's a story that there might be one or two people here haven't heard yet. Bob certainly has, about the moment First Comics was created.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Montreal, Quebec, on New Year's Eve, 1973, and I was at a Woolworths. You remember Woolworths, Americans?
Oh, I had one at 79th Street and Broadway in Manhattan.
Oh, I've been there. I used to live on 72nd.
I've been to that.
Anyway, at this place, Quebec is a French-speaking neighborhood, province, and I was just hanging out, looking around, like looking at all this cool stuff. And then I saw the racks. They had a graphic novel rack, a fairly big one. We didn't even have graphic novels, let alone racks to put them in America. And I'm looking at all this stuff, mostly from France, obviously. I'm looking at all this, Juillet and just beautiful stuff. And I don't understand a word of it, but I'm looking at it and I can get some story, not as much as I'm accustomed to, but I can get some story just off the visuals. And my takeaway, which happened instantly, was, why can't we do this here? Here meaning there, there being the United States of America. Why can't we do this? Why are we just perceived as superheroes, Superman, Batman? First Comics was an attempt to go in that direction, but knowing the realities of the commercial world, we started off with heroic fantasy. Now we did get away from it, but it was one step at a time. And I did sort of the same thing. At DC, I would dress up. The question isn't really a superhero book, the Denny O'Neil, Dennis Cowan question. It is heroic fantasy, kind of, but not entirely. Is that your cat or mine?
Mine.
And okay, and it started with my saying, these little bastards in America don't know what's going on in this world. There's this whole world of comics out there, and I want to know more about it.
Yep.
That's where it started, right there. I suspect the Woolworths isn't here anymore. But
No,
the deli
it's not.
around the corner is.
Yeah.
So what were you doing there?
I was celebrating New Year.
Oh.
In Quebec.
I was staying at the Le Chateau Champlain for New Year's. We'd just been to Toronto. We meaning being this woman who was about 19 or 20 at the time. About 4 years later, we got married. About 16 years after that, we were no longer married. But it ended amicably, and I got this whole first comics idea out of that date.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I want to turn a little bit. First of all, I want to ask you a question before we get any further, because I need to know: is the Red Hook finished for good?
No, I mean it's done at Webtoon, and
No,
I'm considering that 4.5 seasons I did at Webtoon to be what I call the New Brooklyn Saga, and it's a 5-year story within that saga. And I'm talking to a publisher about an omnibus type collection. We'll see. I've already plotted out the next story I want to do, and I would love to do other maybe short stories with that character. But I also have a desire to return a little bit to Billy Dogma, my first kind of creation, one of my first creations, and tell more stories. Maybe that be a next Kickstarter. And I do have 2 other. I've already plotted out what would be another issue of COVID Cop,
right?
And then I have an idea for a 3rd one. So, whoop.
Yep.
Whoa,
Don't worry about it.
Bob.
Don't worry about it. I'm here. One
Bob
second.
is
You
down.
good? You okay?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. One second.
And then he was gone.
He says he's here, and now he's gone.
I was disconnected, but we're able to still do this. All right, cool.
Well,
technology.
I'm an editor. I'm used to people just disappearing.
Yeah. But ultimately, yes, I do want to do more Red Hook, and I have story ideas. And I guess the bigger question is, I lived a really awesome autonomous good 5 or 6 years where I was writing and drawing something that I got paid for and that I owned. That's not always the case. So but now who could I work with, or do I as I test the waters on Kickstarter and possibly Patreon or Substack or whatever, where you can create a loyal fan base of sorts that would be interested in underwriting, new stories from me. I'm praying that I can, enter that phase in some way, because a lot of other people are doing it. The dirty secret or the fear is that you do this stuff and nobody shows up for you, and you find out,
Right.
So far I'm doing okay. I'm not doing great.
You have to be courageous.
You have to be courageous. You have to double down. I take my piddly little investment and I use that right now to be able to survive while making this, in hopes that I can, pay the artist, pay the creator, because everyone else gets paid first. That's the other thing. A printer isn't going to do it for free. The U.S. mail isn't going to give you free stamps and envelopes. There's all the labor that goes into this. And I really respect the people who do Kickstarters, because it's a lot of work, and it's exhausting.
It's an enormous amount of work.
It's as physically as exhausting as it's more mentally exhausting, because you're constantly, paying attention and trying to figure out other ways to just get one more, sale. And this is also something that I want to use once it's in print soon, is what I'll be selling at shows for the next year. When I go to shows, now I have a better reason to go to shows, because I've been online a lot, or, if I do a comic for Archie or DC or Marvel, I get 10 comp copies. That's it. This, I get to sell something that's mine, and it's a little more artisanal, and it wasn't online, and maybe you saw some promotional images, but the comic is only going to be in your hands,
Right.
Well, that's the dream. And guys like Will Eisner and Al Cap, and certainly Milton Caniff, fought hard for that. And yet it still took another 50 years for it to really take over comics. The economics of comics are very different than the economics of newspaper comic strips back in the 40s. Totally different. but publishing is a stupid business to be in if you're looking to get wealthy. Not everybody becomes Bennett Cerf. So, and I'm not even sure Bennett Cerf was wealthy, quite frankly. But still, nonetheless, you're going where some important people tested the waters. Now we have crowdfunding. Oh, that's cool. We'll have other things, and we'll have other distribution means. They will continue to grow and expand. And if you own your shit, you get to control where it goes.
Yeah.
You think something's stupid, you don't have to do it. You think something's a wonderful idea, that's great. You think that working with that guy is a terrific idea, but that guy thinks you're full of it? Tough luck. It's show business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to make mistakes in order to learn from them to know what to do better,
All the time.
All the time. I would say, like, it's very difficult. Like, if I'm watching a movie or I'm reading a great comic book or a novel or listening to an amazing song, it's very hard for me to learn from that. I can only learn from the ones that kind of suck, or they tried and they failed, and then you go, okay, well, what wasn't working? Because you feel like something was working, but where did it go awry, and how can you learn from that?
How does that process work for you on your stuff? whether it's comics or screenwriting or playwriting, how do you step away from being the creator to be the reader,
to be the consumer or the reader?
How does that work for you?
I do think about that a lot. I think this is not going to be a proper answer, but I
just want your answer. That's all.
But a little bit is when I first read my comics out loud at a salon, when I got invited to project my comics on a wall, and I realized, well, comics aren't meant to be read out loud, So because I did it and I realized that, I started to write comics that could be read out loud. So I started to think a little bit different, and I started to be like, well, maybe that's what someone is doing when they read my comics. They're reading it in their own head, right? So how do you arrange the words, or how do you pace it? I think about that, and there was another thing, and now I'm blanking. Oh, it has to do with managing people. So when you're doing a comic book, you can be one person that does it all, but when I grew up, it was an assembly line: the writer, penciler, inker, letterer, colorist, editor, right? At the very least. And that's because of labor, because of time and deadlines and everything else, right? But then you could find someone that could do it all, or maybe you don't try to do a monthly book, you put it out 4 times a year or whatever, right? But you could be a one-stop shop, right? But when it comes to theater, you need actors, you need light, you need an audience. You're going to get a different kind of response from an audience because it's not this internal thing, So theater is a whole other animal that you need to write in anticipation of an audience responding, or when is an actor going to. And also, that's another thing. What are actors going to bring to your words? What is a director going to do to arrange and choreograph this scenario? Now make it film, and forget directing. Forget, telling an actor what to do or where to put the camera. You're managing expectations. You have a bunch of people standing around you going, what's next, Dean? And you have to be so prepared. And I've said this before, and I learned this at the Manhattan Film Institute. There's the movie you prepare to make, and it is the one you get to make on the day that you make it. And then you have the stuff that you're going to then make in the editing room. So you never really make the movie you thought you were going to make. Okay? So, and then you have to serve the virtues of the storytelling medium. Why is it a comic book? Why is it a play? Why is it a movie? How is it a movie? How is it a play? How is it a comic book? Right? So I'm thinking about all of that stuff. So if I can just get a story out, that's almost the last concern these days when you're trying to figure out like, what is the best way to present this stuff, and sometimes I'll talk to people who really don't understand how to craft a story, and I'll say, tell me a joke. Jokes are pretty quick usually, right? It can be long and elaborate, but if you can tell me set up a punchline and get me to set it up and get me to the punchline, that's the beginning of how you tell a story. beginning, middle, end, right? I know some writers like to know what the ending of their story is so they can write to it. I often start with the story not knowing what the ending is at all. And then about halfway through, I go, oh shit, I think I need to figure out an ending for this. So then I look at what I've written, and then I figure
at some point you have to figure out its direction here.
Yeah.
But yes, I don't. Whatever works for the creator of the product. Mickey Spillane wrote like that. He'd write the ending first, and you can't say he wasn't a successful writer. He was outselling the Bible 3-1. He had better plots, but still, you do what's best for the job, what's best for you in terms of your capabilities. The beautiful thing about having my job, being an editor, other than the fact that it's great for people with short attention spans, is you get to work with a lot of different people, and if you're doing your job right, you're working with each one a different way to bring out the best in them on that particular story. And I find that to be a very exciting experience. And if you don't, you probably should be not doing that for a living. But that's just because I'm a hard ass. It's wonderful. You approach a movie or a stage production or a comic book in a story in 3 completely different ways, even if you think you don't.
Yep.
Your mind's eye parses it out.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I had this other thought that I was thinking about. Like, we have this thing. You just bought a bunch of comic books. You just showed us some things. You can't get those comic books without going to where they don't exist other than in a physical form. And maybe this is a question for Karen Green, but I'm not sure. So what do we think about the concept of digitizing everything? Things that aren't available online. Like what is that? How's that?
Everything is available online.
I'll tell you what my heart says. Sure, digitize everything or whatever, but what you're really killing is what I love to do when we didn't have everything online, when we didn't have the internet, which was going and rifling through boxes or going to Quimby's or See Here in New York City when you go to the zine section or you go to an old comic book shop, the art of discovery and then finding an actual artifact, right?
Sure.
And then you would have it and then other people didn't have it. So it was like almost a bartering thing or a way to like to have, woo somebody to spend time with them over the artifact, but then you're bonding over it, but really you're becoming friends or your enemies or whatever and having conversation. And now
you're spelunking over it.
You're spelunking. Absolutely.
You really are.
I had that experience in Los Angeles this year, and I've mentioned it before, but on the Sunday of Los Angeles Comic-Con, there was a guy who had a box and it was $5 for $1, 20 cents a comic. And there was a bunch of like early 90s, like Vertigo and some Eclipse in there and stuff like that. And there was Sandman Mystery Theater #1, which Shelley Bond was credited as or assistant editor. And so I took it to her and I'm like, oh, would you sign this? Because, I just got it for 20 cents. And she's like, wait, where is that? So then Shelley Bond and I spent about an hour rifling through 50-cent boxes, just all like everything in that range, like basically from late 80s to early 2000s, just all kinds of stuff. And it was one of the greatest experiences. Like, and I went there and I've told this story before, but I took just a small bag to go on the flight. And I'm like, I don't have any room to bring back comics with me. She's like, don't worry about it. I'm going to mail it to you. And so I had like a whole huge stack of great stuff. And it's fun. Like, and when I was in New York last year, I, spent some time looking at Dennis Kitchen's books, and I have got a couple of things out of there. That I bought a copy of Women's Comics, and you're not going to find they're things you can't find certain places, and to be honest with you, like I said, like there's some of the stuff that I found in those boxes that aren't available. Like they're not on Comixology. I mean, somebody may have gone through the process of ripping it apart and scanning it, and you can find it somewhere on a torrent or something.
Yes, people have been doing that since the microfiche days,
Sure.
microfilm days.
Yep.
So it's all out there in one form or another. You may not like the form, but if it's your only way to read something, I will bootleg an old comic book in a heartbeat if I need that story for my work. If if I'm editing something, I said, "Wow, there's a story that's a lot like that." I'll grab it. Otherwise, I'm much more circumspect. There was at some big behemoth convention, I was talking to Jamie Graham Crackers, old friend, and next to me, spelunking through the boxes, was Dan DiDio, and who was still with DC at the time, had a few more years to go, and. I say hi to Dan. We chat for a little bit. The three of us chat a little bit. Dan is pulling out copies of Where Monsters Dwell, the Marvel monster comic reprint comic. Nice covers. It's a reprint comic, and he's flipping them on top of the boxes. And I say, "What? Where Monsters Dwell?" And he says, "Yeah, I said, "No, I like those stories too. I'm not putting it down. I just those are reprints. You're paying good money for good reprints." And he says, "Look, I'm a fanboy." I says, "Yeah, I get that, and it's good that the guy in your position is. That's great, because only a fanboy, only a person who loves the medium one way or another, and therefore produces within that medium." The only way that they're going to do a good job is if they understand what it's like to go spelunking through boxes looking for copies of a reprint of a reprint.
Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. You keep energizing your passion with discovery, and again, it doesn't matter if it's a famous comic or a stupid comic or one you've never heard of. That's the stuff that keeps you, invigorated. And,
I'm a big Bob Montana fan.
I love Bob Montana. And
9 out of 10 comic book readers, American comic book readers today, probably don't know who he was. He died about, 15 years ago. But he created Archie and did the newspaper strip for decades, but did the original comic book stories and a lot of the covers, and they had a lot of good people doing Archie over the years. But he was the first, and he wasn't just definitive, he was the best.
Yeah. Agreed. I'm a big CC Beck fan. I love Frank Robbins' Batman.
Oh, me too. I like Frank Robbins' anything.
Yeah, anything. Right?
Anything. He could draw a straight line on a piece of paper, and I'm there.
Yeah, man. But that's the stuff you find. Like, there's the stuff that's popular, and you can understand why something's popular, and then there's just the side stuff, and I feel like that's the gruel. That's the fire.
100%. You know what you do? You know where you find all that? You go and find old copies of First Comics, and you find that stuff, and people are going and younger people who weren't around for that, and they're like, who was making this? Or you go and find stuff like Wasteland, and you're like, how did they print this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I get that from pros all the time.
I understand that.
Today.
I've asked you at least 5 times. It doesn't matter. But by the way, Sherry calls it dumpster diving. She when we're at a show, she's like, all right, she knows that it's time for me
I
to
have
go
no
dumpster
respect
diving.
for the people who pay my salary.
But But exactly, like, or you find like you're like, oh, I don't remember this copy of Justice League, and then all of a sudden in it there's a bonus book by some guy who had a broken arm.
Oh
You know,
God, I was in a wheelchair when I inked that Booster Gold Blue Beetle story in that bonus book, and I had broken both my legs and my right drawing arm. It was in a cast while I'm trying to ink, and I remember getting the pages, and when it published, some of the artwork was altered, and it was Joe Orlando who had gone in and fixed a couple of things, and thank God, even though it's still awful. But we grow up in public. That's the other thing, guys. You grow up in public, and that's why I really appreciate when you say, you think I'm only getting better. God, I hope I'm
you
only
are. You are. It's really good. Again, we're getting to the end of this, but I do want to reiterate that COVID Cop is available, and it is beautiful. It is, there's of course a fantastic story in there, but sometimes comics. The amazing thing to me about comics is that there are so many facets to making a comic great. And if you can hit all those pieces, if you can hit the story, if you can hit the art, if you can hit the pacing, the temperament of it, if the line work and the color work all matches together and nobody fucks up the lettering, it's fantastic. And what we've seen, from what I've seen, this you've done it. It looks great.
Thank you.
It looks great.
Thanks, guys.
If it strokes the sense of wonder, it works well.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people, and I'm sorry, Dean, but you are one of them, who know how to do that.
Thank you.
Wow, look at that. Even if you don't say it in those words, somewhere in your brain, it's like,
It's really kind of you guys. It's really kind. Thank you.
Well, and I wanted to bring up the fact that you were my first interview since I started.
Right.
When I started doing this, you were the first person that I actually interviewed that was published, and so now I think this is probably our fourth or fifth time that we've done this.
That. Yep.
And always a pleasure.
Always. Thank you.
So I love seeing you, Dean. You know that, and the next convention, maybe we can have dinner or lunch or something.
I owe you a dinner, I think. I was going to make you dinner, right? At some point.
Well, I think there was money involved.
You have to back the book to a certain level, and then Dean will come make you dinner.
That's right.
$175 will come over and make
my
dinner. I don't know if we'll make yours, but I'll make mine. And I don't live that far away.
Mm-hmm.
Dean,
Sherry's hoping to see you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
same, Sherry.
By both, you mean me or Bob?
Yes. Well, she's she'll see you in Ithaca. In Ithaca.
Doing C2E2 and doing what's the name of the show? Ithacon. After that. Ithacon. It's where they invented the TV tube.
Really?
No, it's a very elaborate joke, and if anybody really cares, write in and I'll write it out.
Yeah,
it's way too elaborate to tell. I'm actually embarrassed I made the reference. Every once in a while, a line will come out of my mouth that only Howard Shea can understand.
Well, that's not surprising either. But I also know that there's like Kodak was up in Rochester, so it's in the same area. So it could have been something related to that.
Actually, it wasn't. All right, Schenectady is actually where all that started. But okay.
Okay, we'll let it go. All right, so Dina, what else? What's coming up? I know you're deep into this for the next. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be
20 days,
and I'll be done coloring in about a week or less, and everything, and then looking at getting it, printed, and then I should be doing a couple stretch goals, just a few minor stretch goals, maybe on Monday, the latest, and for the last 2 weeks of the campaign. And
the quicker you back, the quicker you'll get the updates too.
That's right. Thank you. And after that, I'm hustling, man. I'm trying to figure out next steps, next gigs, and maybe I'll get a gig here or there. Maybe editors are seeing my COVID Cop all over the place might be like, you know what? Let's give Dean 4 pages over here because that's what usually I get about 4 to 10 pages. Okay.
The story in the next issue of Marvel Fanfare, maybe.
I wish. Oh, I wish Marvel Fanfare.
I wish that both of the bigger companies did things like Marvel Fanfare
Or an anthology, a regular anthology,
a regular
magazine.
like they do that, but they do it only for like they do for the whatever the month it is. We have
I think when it comes to Marvel Fanfare, I think you need to get Al Milgrom there.
There you go.
That's
Mark
what
has an idea.
You really need.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Sure, Mark. You want to finance it? Oh
That's
no!
all we need
You've
is
got
money.
all those children. Yeah.
You just need the money. That's
we need
all.
to we need to pick Dean's brain on the crowdfunding aspects of things.
Yeah,
I never gave a flying fig about money. I'm the least financially motivated person in the world.
I understand that.
And when you hit my age, at some point you think like, God, I made a mistake.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Mark has the financing plan for us. 189 Nerf guns.
Really.
That could work. That could fund it.
That'd be a good comic.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
That's the thing about it. Anything can be a good comic, right?
Yeah. But in terms of future, that's what's up in the air right now.
Good.
And part of me is like, I love comics, but I also love other storytelling mediums. So, maybe I'll pursue a couple other things and hopscotch between stuff, and who knows?
Are you doing Yotto again?
Well, I did it last year, and there's a possibility I could maybe go back in 2 years.
Okay.
So I might do that. I do enjoy residencies, but I did really enjoy mentoring. I do like doing that, so I might kind of go in that direction a little bit.
That would be fantastic.
That is the highest of callings.
Well, thank you, and I agree. It is a high calling, and also in terms of money, Mike. Like, I've never thought about making money to buy a yacht. I just thought about making money so I could eat and sleep and make comics, right? Like, so maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe I should have been thinking about the yacht so that I would be doing better in comics because now I have a yacht. I don't know. I don't know where the mental energies go in that way.
I once saw a fight between two guys. I'll identify them at the end. Over which car they should take for the three of us to go out to lunch. And I'm looking at their cars, and they had the same exact car.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know why they were fighting. However, I had just looked at their offices. They had adjoining offices, little door, like in a hotel room. And if you stood in that open doorway and you looked left and you looked right, you'd see the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know what the guys who at that time were running Archie Comics, which, by the way, is still owned by those families, what they were fighting about. Are their yachts the same? I know both of them had yachts. Are they both exactly the same? But it would be rude of me to ask, and I never did.
And it reminds me of a fantastic Far Side cartoon where you see an office or a room, and there's two men in it sitting at desks, right? There's what does he say? He's thanks. That's Russ. He was just in my ACA.
I interrupted you.
Great.
I wanted you to see that.
From Phoenix, Arizona. He's great. If he can put up his how to find his comics, and if you don't mind putting it up, Russ, you should do that. But anyway, the Far Side cartoon was a guy sitting at a desk and a guy sitting at another desk across from him. They're exactly the same clothing, the same desks. And the guy, but one guy's pointing his hand and saying, "Someday I'm going to be sitting at your desk." And that's all it said. And that's the psychology right there. It's like, you're not, it's not good enough what you have.
Yeah.
I want what you have. But wait, we have the same thing.
It's so much better to just sit around and tell stories. And I mean it. It really is.
Once you've experienced them and had them. Yes, absolutely.
You can make them up. It's all right. That's the whole point of this, right?
That's right. Did Russ show up and show?
He hasn't, but if he does, I'll definitely.
It's Amazing Arizona Comics or something like that. He's great. He's awesome.
I'm glad you had a good time there.
It was great. It was great. I miss it. We called our studio, 10 years ago when I was there, we called the Studio YOLO. You know, you only live once.
Mm-hmm.
And this year we called the studio FOMO, fear of missing out. And I've been feeling a little bit of that since I left.
Sure.
That's good.
Well,
That's
thanks
good.
guys so much. And anybody
Thank you,
listening
Dean.
or watching, COVID Cop, Dean Haspiel, Kickstarter till about March 30th.
Is there a quick link? I don't remember.
Oh, it's like Kickstarter, COVID Cop, Dean. It's easy to find. You know,
You can also,
We have it on our
as I said, it's on popculturesquad.com. It's on. There's a link to
Right.
this in
Right.
in the post for this SquadCast that's on the site. There's a link to the
Right.
COVID Cop right there.
Great.
So
All
thanks,
right.
Dean. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.
We'll see you soon. Good luck.
Thank you,
and
old
when
friend.
the next thing's out, we'll talk again, or maybe we'll just talk to talk.
Oh, of course.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Have a good night. Talk to you later. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
you too. Take it easy. Aha.
Well, that was fun. Super fun.
Yeah, I never liked that thing.
Yeah, exactly. So we are going to be on Thursday in 2 weeks again, and
Okay.
we
And
have
who
a
are we
guest
talking
lined
to?
up. We are going to be talking to Scott Koblish. I think Koblish. I think it's Koblish. We're going to talk to him about his career. We're going to talk about comics. We're going to talk about what he's been doing lately, because what he's been doing lately is mind-boggling. If anyone
So
hasn't
we should talk to him before they arrest him.
Well, listen, his fingers must have fallen off at least partially, and his eyes have definitely gotten like 2 degrees worse from what he did. If anybody doesn't know, Scott recently completed and is going to be published soon a connecting wraparound covers for Fantastic Four 700, and there are 700 characters in the design. It is unbelievable. So we're going to talk to him about that. We're going to talk to him about other stuff. He's a tremendous cartoonist and writer and artist, and so he's going to be on. We might have another guest. We're still checking that out, and so that'll be on the 23rd. We'll be in the same spot. In the meantime, we're going to do some Women's History Month stuff on Monday, and there's a slight change to the schedule, but the week before we talked to Scott, we're going to have another one. So everyone be there. And everyone needs to be there on Monday, because on Monday we're going to make the special announcement for our extra special last Women's History Month SquadCast. Which
Also, I believe on Monday. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't.
No,
mean
go
to
ahead.
cut you off.
No, you absolutely go ahead. I'm done.
I believe on Monday, I will be on Brainiac on Banjo at popculturesquad.com. Didn't have a column this week. Screwed up. Next week, I'm going to talk about a famous literary figure making not quite his debut, his first appearance in comics in about 70 years.
Oh, that's good.
And
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and hopefully it'll turn people on to some new stuff that they might really enjoy. How's that for a teaser?
That's good. I'm
All
looking forward to it. Also, they're over in the next couple of days on the regular podcast version of the interview podcast for Pop Culture Squad. There will be a new episode dropping where we talk to a couple of people about a crowdfunded project on backer kit called Cthulhu is Hard to Spell. And so that's going to be, it is true, because I tried to spell it and it was difficult, but it's a great conversation about, I think you would enjoy it because we talk about Lovecraft and his problems, and
yeah, he had some real problems.
Yeah. But we also talk about how the people who are making this are really trying to subvert that. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. I won't get into it because you have a whole thing coming up. But I admire Lovecraft in terms of the overview of his work, but he was just a bigoted motherfucker.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so much so that it totally destroyed my appreciation of his stuff. And that was in the 60s.
Sure. So I guess that's it for tonight. And we'll be back in a couple weeks. Thanks everybody for joining, and keep watching Pop Culture Squad.
Take it easy, folks.